James Gunn is the writer and director of the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and recently he finished the script for Guardians 3. Not long ago, Disney fired him over some old tweets where he'd made some rather crude pedo jokes, and the internet has been in an uproar over it all. The reactions and reactionaries online have told you that this is about James Gunn being a real-life pedophile, or that it's about internet lynch mobs and their outrage, or that it's about free speech, or that it's about Mike Cernovich. These are conclusions, some of which I was going to discuss, first with a 2,500 word script that I wrote and recorded, and then later with a 2,000 word script that I wrote and recorded with 10 audio takes and 3 video rough cuts between both scripts. It's easy to come up with conclusive causality or to come up with a knee-jerk reaction. It takes more time to dig in and see the complexities and nuance of an event. Long enough that now this is the coldest take on the internet, and it's being broadcast now that no one cares. But at least it's a little more thorough than the first hot takes. And that's what this is about, being thorough through layers and layers of complexity, which took a while for me to figure out even with the help of a few friends. Despite what you may think or have heard, it is my considered opinion that the firing of James Gunn is not about him being an actual pedophile. It's not about internet lynch mobs, it's not really about First Amendment free speech issues, and it's not about Mike Cernovich being the only reason he got fired. Some of these things do matter, and they did play into this. Some don't. Some were factors, and others are less relevant than you might think. This is a big onion, and this onion has a lot of layers. So let's start peeling. What happened? Well, Mike Cernovich got his hands on some old pedo joke tweets from James Gunn. Cernovich reposted them, and Disney fired Gunn.
That's terrible.
The immediate claim by Cernovich and his neckbeard acolytes is that Gunn is a real-life pedophile because his jokes come from his dark reality, so he's joking about his real life. By this logic, Count Dankula is a Nazi and guilty of inciting race-based violence and genocide. Ironically, Cernovich himself tweeted a defense of Dankula's actions as being just a joke, but so far there is no hard evidence that Gunn is a pedophile or has engaged in any criminal activity related to pedophilia. The immediate defensive claim was that James Gunn had been the victim of an internet outrage mob. That gets interesting when you consider that Gunn was fired within 24 hours of his old tweets coming to light. More correctly, the news of his firing surfaced within 24 hours. The actual decision to fire him may have been made within hours of the revelation on the 19th of July, but it's impossible to know for sure. In other words, behind the scenes, James Gunn may have been fired the same day these tweets went public, or they may have decided to fire him the same day the tweets went public. Most of the post-firing outrage has been directed at him getting rehired, but put simply, there was almost no time for a mob to form before Gunn was fired in the first place. Some have argued that this issue is about free speech. This is technically not true in a First Amendment or legal sense because the government isn't involved and they're not suppressing anyone's speech. James Gunn was free to joke and speak, but he was not free from the consequences. Disney is making a statement by firing him, and if they were to keep him, that would make a different statement. Both of those actions would say something, and so yes, Disney has free speech too. Others have argued that this is all on Mike Cernovich's shoulders, but Cernovich is a conspiracy theorist. He's maybe an alt-writer, maybe not, maybe he's an alt-lighty, but he is a fan of the Pizzagate conspiracy theory. He's a muckraker, and he randomly accuses people of being pedophiles. He also has some sort of alpha male guerrilla program for dudes online. Just saying that line right now, I can tell you one simple thing. I don't take this guy seriously, and I'd wager that very few others of significance do either. Cernovich is no one that Disney would ever want to agree with or acquiesce to. So if Cernovich isn't a natural choice for a Disney influencer, what would influence Disney? Well, one answer is the truth. Mike Cernovich did tell the truth, and he also told a lie. The truth was that James Gunn had made some controversial tweets. The lie is that James Gunn is a pedophile and part of the bigger underground Hollywood pedophilia scene. The truth that Disney really feared was that they would find proof of James Gunn doing something that they wouldn't like. This proof would have to be about Gunn's actual words or actions, because odds are Disney doesn't like Cernovich. I mean, who does? They don't care what he thinks, and they don't want to give him any power. If that's true, then this is about Gunn's tweets and how Disney saw them. I don't think Disney or hardly anyone else thinks of Gunn as a true pedophile. This leads to our next logical idea. Disney didn't know about James Gunn's old tweets, and Mike Cernovich did. or he discovered them. Cernovich is a nobody to Disney, but he is a nobody that made James Gunn's cringy tweets a spectacle in the public arena. And my theory is that Disney never saw this coming. Consider the following thoughts. Gunn's tweets were made an eternity ago by Twitter standards. How would Disney audit 10 years worth of thousands of tweets from Gunn to make sure that he had been a good boy on Twitter? But more importantly, why? Why would Disney have a reason to audit a decade's worth of James Gunn's tweets? He's an uber lefty like most everyone at Disney. He tweets lefty things. What cause would they have for an exhaustive search when they have every reason to believe that his virtue just matches their own? In other words, what's our reason for Disney to search through tens of thousands of James Gunn's tweets before he was in trouble? Now, if Disney did know about these tweets by James, wouldn't they have a mitigation plan in place to protect a director that has made them a ton of money? Apparently they didn't. They booted Gunn so fast that even Cernovich was probably surprised. Disney offered no fight or pushback to a 2-bit internet blogger. If they did know about the tweets, then all we can deduce from their actions and behavior after the fact is that their plan to deal with the scandal was to simply dump James Gunn and his billion-dollar movie franchise overboard. Do we really believe that Disney had no plan other than to fire James Gunn? But is there more to this? Well, maybe. Disney is one of the largest children's entertainment corporations in the world, if not the largest. A high-profile employee made pedophilia jokes that Disney wasn't aware of until those jokes went viral. Of all companies, a kids and family-oriented company would want to distance itself from pedo jokes for obvious reasons. But there is a historical reason why Disney might be so touchy about this, a reason that made them more apt to nuke James Gunn. Let's rewind to the year 1989. There was a small, low-budget horror film being shot in Northern California. The movie was called Clown House, which was written and directed by a man named Victor Salva. Salva is probably best known for writing and directing the more modern Jeepers Creepers film franchise. Sometime around production of Clown House, Victor Salva sexually abused the lead child star, a 12-year-old Nathan Forrest Winters, and Salva videotaped one of the encounters. Winters had previously worked for Salva on Salva's first film called Something in the Basement. Salva was arrested, and child porn was found at his home in addition to the tape of his encounter with Winters. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He was released just 15 months later. By 1995, Salva was already making his next film, a film he had written called Powder about a young albino man with special powers. The film involved none other than Buena Vista Pictures, but today that entity is known as Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. You see, Walt Disney was making a movie that was written and directed by a convicted pedophile. The problem was, as reported by the LA Times, that they only learned of Salva's criminal record midway through the production. Their immediate defense was that there were no children or minors on set, that Salva had done his prison time, and that he was trying to do good now. Disney was on the hook with a pedophile director, and it made the news. Moreover, the movie was a box office success, meaning that it made money. Not a lot, but some. It wasn't a huge movie for 1995, but it was big enough to raise a few eyebrows. I think Disney was kind of glad that it sucked and didn't get a lot of traction. But the fact remained, Disney had unknowingly hired a convicted pedophile, found out partway through production of the film Powder, and kept the pedophile on for the remainder of the project. A friend of mine tells me that in some circles, it took Disney a while to live that down, and this was long before Twitter and social media could make it fester and generate even more outrage. Interestingly enough, Victor Salva has a Jeepers Creepers 4th installment planned, and Hollywood is going to let him do it. Even more interesting, there are hints of pedophilia in the 2nd or 3rd Jeepers Creepers movie. That's a whole mess to unpack right there, but not today. So now let's do a thought experiment. Imagine you are a Disney exec working for Walt Disney Pictures. It's July 19th, you're at your desk, and one of your assistant executives storms into your office. He's got news. James Gunn is trending on Twitter for old tweets containing pedo jokes. So you call a meeting with legal, HR, marketing, and all the other top executives. Now, going into this meeting, you're aware of a couple of pretty significant realities, like Disney's fragile up and down stock history, recent hit and miss movie releases, the upcoming release of Christopher Robin, the dark legacy of Powder, and the potential for that scandal to repeat. It's been less than a year since Harvey Weinstein was outed, and the Me Too movement has trashed a lot of good movies, companies, and shows since then. As an exec, these tweets are news to you, and a quick search online confirms that they're edgy, gross, and offensive to a lot of normal people. Normal people like American parents and the families that Disney markets to. You know they're just jokes, but even Gunn is purging his Twitter feed. So now you're gambling in a sense. because you can't know 100% for sure if James Gunn is really clean until months from now. By then, no one will remember what happened if an investigation clears him, but if he's dirty, even a little bit, no one will ever let you forget. Not Wall Street, not the board, not Rotten Tomatoes, not the fans, not the #MeToo folks, not anyone. James Gunn has got to go before this becomes an issue. If you're wrong to fire him, well, it's James Gunn getting destroyed and not your career or company. If you're wrong, Guardians 3 will suck, though maybe you'll keep the script that Gunn wrote and try to find a good director and hope for 68% on Rotten Tomatoes. But that's the gamble. One movie, one franchise finale, gambled against a lot of money, a lot of bad press, a little bit of dirty history, and a guy who had the wrong jokes brought to light at the wrong time, and the years it will take to live it all down. So the decision was made. James Gunn gets the axe. This is my working theory as to the mechanism of why he was fired. Simply put, James Gunn was fired because he made jokes that represented a potentially large and expensive risk to his employers, a risk they were not ready or willing to take. Firing him also represented a risk, but that was the risk they chose. Those tweets were flammable, yes, but even the best fuel needs a spark. They were only potential risks. It was Mike Cernovich who sparked the fire. It is on Gunn that he made the jokes, and his employer didn't like them and what they might mean for the company. It's really that simple. You can argue that he shouldn't have made those jokes, and you'd probably be at least partly right. You can argue that Disney should cut him slack over his billion-dollar profitability. You can argue that Cernovich is a scumbag. You can argue that the risks weren't that great, or you could argue that the risks for Disney were pretty steep in a Me Too world. All of those points have merit. There's a number of things that came together here to cause the demise of James Gunn. That's why blaming any one cause isn't really logically tenable. There is one last possibility that we might see unfold in the future. Disney might be using the tactic of firing Gunn and then letting the actors, who are full of virtue themselves, and the fans, who can't really be wrong, create an outcry which would mitigate the issues of rehiring Gunn. MSNBC used a similar tactic with success after Cernovich targeted Sam Seder. It doesn't look like this is going to be the case so far, but it is a thought. Now, Cernovich has nothing to brag about in the firing of James Gunn. He only got lucky in the material he found and the timing of his publicity stunt. Take luck out of the equation, and Cernovich is just another neckbeard with conspiracy theories and a desperate need for attention. He was willfully obtuse about the jokes, and he wanted and needed them to be more than just jokes. That's the nature of a conspiracy theorist. Things need to be evidence. These things must not allowed to be irrelevant. Cernovich certainly has no interest in real justice, however, and I think that's something we can be pretty firm on. If he was interested in real justice, he would have quietly forwarded those tweets to law enforcement and let them follow due process rather than going public to destroy someone. Instead, Cernovich promoted injustice in several ways. First, his methodology was to make sure that a person who was merely accused would face consequences. Cernovich wanted Gunn in trouble without due process or any process at all, other than the process of being accused. Second, what if James Gunn is actually a pedophile? From the looks of it, Cernovich gave Gunn a nice public warning, which would give James Gunn time to clean house before the fuzz shows up. If that's the case, Cernovich's need for publicity actually resulted in a loss of criminal evidence. Third, the nature of true justice is that it's not a spectacle. In my humble opinion, Cernovich totally used this as a publicity stunt to boost his own cred with another media victim. The way Cernovich did this implies that he's far more interested in his own advertising than in actual justice. If I was James Gunn, I would be preparing a lawsuit against Mike Cernovich for slander and financial damages. The judgment could cost Cernovich a mint, and while I do believe Cerno has the freedom to shoot his mouth off, Gunn certainly has the freedom to sue him for it. So what are the takeaways from this whole mess? Well, 1, your speech will have consequences, both good and bad. Like I said in the Fire the Racists Thought Snack video, if you're going to be edgy, controversial, and potentially fireable for your words, then wear a mask. Use an alias and mitigate some consequences. 2, this is because your employers, sponsors, associates, even family and friends will potentially face backlash from your words and actions, whether it's justified or not. You being anonymous protects them, and it protects you from their reactions. 3, there will always be irresponsible, hateful, stupid people that want to take your words and destroy you with them, in or out of context. If nothing else, the cases of James Gunn and Count Dankula prove this point uncomfortably well. And you cannot control how others will take your speech. They may laugh, cringe, cry, ignore you, or try to take you apart. That's up to them. It's not really up to you. 4th, in all of these cases, we should reaffirm the rights and freedoms of those involved. James Gunn, Disney, Mike Cernovich, the cast, and more all have freedom of speech. The government won't stop them from speaking about this. None of them are free from the consequences, though, in terms of bad press, firings, getting sued, making bad movies, or losing money. And fifth, if we're going to talk about free speech in corporate or private space, please see my video on free speech online, where I dive into that a little bit more. This is not a pleasant or an easy situation. As it stands now, James Gunn is out of a job, Disney is out of a good director, and their final Guardians installment is probably going to suck. A little bit, or maybe a lot. And unfortunately, Cernovich gets cred coming out of this. It is really a no-win. What I hope I have impressed on you is the reality that hot, instant, emotionally charged takes probably leave things out, and that reality is a messy, complex onion that takes time to peel. I'm 3,000 words into this script, with 2 other scripts behind me, hours of research put in, and I have probably left something out. I have probably missed something, and this cold take took a while to come up with, as in more than 2 weeks. Which leads us to the question of how much we want to evaluate things, how much time we want to invest in learning, and how much outrage or interest we have in the subject. Admittedly, I find the story a little interesting. I'd more like to think that it's a good case study into things like reputation, history, critical thinking, and how instant hot takes miss things like these. It takes a while to think about events like this, to refuse emotionalism and to find some sort of objective path forward, and to formulate those thoughts when outrage and hot takes are the currency that drives social media. I hope the next time an outrage-prone incident like this happens that you, I, and everyone listening can remember just how complex these issues can be and withhold judgment for a few days despite the masses dishing out hot takes. It's a harder and slower road to think things through for a while, but I get the feeling it just might be worth it. I'd like to thank Dave and Alyssa specifically for their help and insight on this video, because without them, I too would have missed a lot of nuance in this story.